at the Ethereal Virtual Summit. It's May of 2020, and my name is Tyler Mulvihill. So we're here to talk about the future of sustainable supply chains and the tokenization of collectibles and luxury goods. So thank you for joining in the morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you're tuning in from. And if you're listening to this later, I hope this content is still relevant and we've accurately predicted the future. So I'm Tyler Mulvihill. I co-founded a company called Treum.io, Treum.io. It's being incubated by Consensus, the broader mesh, and we're here to talk to you about the future. During any part of this presentation, feel free to drop comments in the chat. I'll try to address them in real time. Although this isn't much of an interactive kind of experience, we're going to try to make this fun. So Treum is in the business of helping other businesses build trust with their consumers and their customers. We do this by bringing transparency, traceability, and tradability to products and supply chains using blockchain technology. And it's important to talk about trust because basically we're predicting the future is a much more trust-based or trustless-based future. So if we take a step back and we really think about what trust is, it's really the most important reason why customers make buying decisions. And throughout the supply chain, there's opportunities for that trust to be broken at every step of the way. So if you think about a supply chain, and you think about a supply chain from raw materials, manufacturing, product sale, and secondary markets, customers are demanding information and they're asking questions during each of these parts of the supply chain. So if we think about this from a raw materials standpoint, we can think about this as the customers are asking whether the ingredients are non-GMO. Are they organic? Are they sustainably sourced? And when the manufacturing happens, is this made in a fair wage manufacturing facility or good manufacturing practices certified manufacturing facility? When we're talking about the product sale, customers are asking for the full provenance, the full transparency and traceability of their product, and the chain of custody throughout. And companies are having a very hard time telling the story of their product because this information really isn't available to them. And then when we move over to the aftermarket, and actually same with the sale, authenticity and ownership becomes incredibly important to the customer. Is this a genuine product that I'm buying? Is this authentic? Was this a stolen good? And how do I prove that this is mine if I want to sell this or trade this in the future? So throughout the supply chain, you can see that customers are asking all of these questions, and companies now are faced with the dilemma of how to bring this information to their customers. And a lot of the times, I'll give you I guess the answer: they can't. So if you think about the supply chain from the flow, trust is eroded throughout the entire supply chain. And from a transparency perspective, the problem here is that brands don't really have an easy way to source, manage, and present proof of product claims. So from a testing, inspection, and certification standpoint, it's hard to get the certifications from even their tier 1 suppliers, let alone tier N. And then it's even harder to come up with a way that you can present that information to the brands or to the consumers that they can understand. From a traceability perspective, there's a serious problem with brands having these complex supply chains that are siloed systems that make it really hard to present and verify provenance. And what this results in is that brands can't tell the story of their products. From a tradability standpoint, fake and stolen goods really hurt brands. There's no simple mechanism right now to easily verify authenticity and ownership. And brands and companies are struggling bringing this ownership and this verification of authenticity to their consumers. So what this really results in is that the erosion of trust and conscientious consumerism is requiring brands to present product facts that customers can instantaneously access and independently verify. And even further is that the erosion of trust is accelerating at all of these stages. So at the very moment where consumers are asking all of these questions, brands are struggling to give them answers. So what's driving this? Really, the customer is force driving change. There's been a paradigm shift of customers from value-driven buyers to purpose-driven buyers. So value-driven buyers primarily are the boomers who buy things and they're conscious of price and convenience. This is very much being put on its head whereas consumers in the millennial generation and Gen Z are aligned with sustainability. They want to see brands that walk the walk. They want to see brands that talk the talk, and they want to see brands that align with the same values that they are buying for. This isn't just me saying this. This is backed up by an incredible amount of data. Some of it as recently as published as January, where 19,000 consumers were surveyed. And out of those 19,000 consumers, 79%, so almost 80% of these consumers today state that it's important for brands to provide guaranteed authenticity, like certifications, when they're purchasing goods. So just like we talked about before, about having the lack of certifications and transparency into product level claims, and also the authenticity and ownership of goods, this is, statistically now being put out in the open for all of us to realize that these are the buying habits of consumers. Of that 79%, 71% of consumers are willing to pay an added premium of up to 37% more for companies offering full transparency and traceability. So if you think about just the consumer packaged goods company, I'll give you some stats real quick. It's about a $650 billion industry in the US. Of that, about 20% is considered sustainable. So we're not talking about just like green, or we're not talking about organic. We're talking about products that have claims that align with values. And if you take 37% of that 20%, you get about $50 billion worth of premiums that customers are currently paying for brands that are bringing this transparency and traceability to their consumers. So right now, I would say that this 50 billion is at risk because these brands are doing it, but customers are asking more questions and they're demanding more information, which requires more coordination and more transparency. And how to bring that to customers is what we're talking about today. So if we take a step back and recap what we've really been talking about today, customers are shifting their buying habits and demands, and companies are having a really hard time bringing this information to the consumer. Okay, so this is all, the kind of the doom and gloom of where the industry is now, but there's certain companies and there's certain success stories where companies and brands are giving the customers what they want. So let's talk about one quick survey, which is the Global 100 Most Sustainable Corporations World Index. This was done for companies in 2019, so we don't have the 2020 data, obviously. And when I went through the list, I was really surprised by who number 2 was. I was coming at this survey with the standpoint that this was going to be some solar farm, or this was going to be, a company who makes hemp woven shoes for native populations. And obviously there's criteria here. The companies had to be over $1 billion. They had to be publicly traded. They had to have this information in a form that could be digestible for the survey. But if I were to ask this audience, I wish this was really interactive so we could have people yell out their guesses here. But if we were to guess who number 2 was, it's Gucci, baby. So I think we're all pretty surprised here. But in 2017, Gucci announced their 10-year sustainability plan with a focus on environment, people, and innovation. So I'll give you kind of a story here. So it's story time and context time. So the Kering Group owns Gucci. So Gucci is part of the Kering Group, which is a powerhouse in luxury industry. They own companies like Balenciaga. They own Yves Saint Laurent. A lot of the companies that you recognize are owned by this company who has been measuring and taking a really forefront, I guess they're at the forefront of this approach of sustainability in the luxury goods industry. So 2017, Gucci's president outlines their 10-year culture of purpose sustainability plan. 2018, they joined the Fur Free Alliance. 2019, donated $1 million to the UNICEF Girls Empowerment Initiative as a founding member. 2019, they announced emissions offset plan to halve their emissions of their supply chain by 2025 and to become carbon neutral after that. So we're talking about some pretty serious initiatives here by a brand that you typically associate with luxury and exclusivity. So how does this translate? So all of this effort, right, that Gucci is putting in, what actually happens here? You move on to the next slide. This translates into sustainability equals revenue. So according to the CEO of Kering, FHP, Gucci's parent company, millennials and Gen Z account for nearly 50% of Gucci's total sales. So going back to the stats earlier about companies or the shift from value-driven to purpose-driven consumers, this is Gucci's entire client base or customer base, over 50%. And what happened was if you look back at what Gucci has done in the past couple of years, they've responded to the consumer demands for this trust and transparency and traceability. And the result was sales were up 16% last year, but even more impressive, sales have doubled in the last 3 years between 16 and 19. So this is obviously not an advertisement for Gucci, but this is something that's really interesting, because when people think about sustainability and people think about tracing raw materials, people don't normally think about the beautiful catwalks on some secluded beach, and they don't think about high fashion or that purse that's in the window that you someday hope to make enough money to afford, like the quality that they provide. But really that's where this whole industry is going. And so you can see that there's been effort, and it's been rewarded by a brand that we all know and love. I guess the future of luxury goods in response to all of these trends is that luxury goods does not equal exclusivity. So this Gen Z, this millennial kind of group that's been responding and asking these questions also don't really associate luxury with this exclusivity that was previously kind of the focus of these houses, but they think of luxury as something that they're buying to enjoy themselves, which makes a really interesting paradigm shift of how consumers perceive the secondary market for luxury goods. Because this isn't about exclusivity, this is about usage. The secondary market for luxury goods is $24 billion and is growing 4x the speed of the traditional luxury goods market. And so the result of this is that the circular economy is here. It's here in a very small, less than 10% of the industry, but I can't see a future where this doesn't grow exponentially. The consumers are demanding it. The consumers are responding positively to it, and they're not looking for exclusivity. They're looking for usage. So let me check my notes, making sure that I'm not forgetting anything here. Another initiative that Gucci is going about is 95% traceability in the raw materials. So we're talking about all the way through the supply chain, from sourcing to manufacturing, to then selling with provenance and authenticity, to finally the secondary market and the circular economy, measuring all of this. So this is just one brand that's at the forefront of the sustainability revolution. And I think that most luxury goods, most consumer packaged goods are going to be following this trend of transparency, traceability, and tradability. Okay, so let's pause here. We've gone over the problems. We've gone over some solutions. We've gone over the case study about how Gucci is using this kind of trend in the market to gain from a revenue standpoint. But let's talk about how companies can benefit and follow Gucci to realize the same benefits. The short answer is they can't. So right now, a pretty staggering study by the Sustainability Consortium found that 81% of 1,700 companies that were surveyed lacked full visibility into their sustainability practices of their supply chains, and over half had no visibility at all. So if we go back to the beginning slides, we have a $54 billion market premium for just the consumer packaged goods industry, something similar in the luxury goods. And to realize this premium, consumers demand transparency, consumers demand authenticity, consumers demand traceability. And what this is saying is that companies and organizations and brands don't have the ability and the information to bring this to their consumers. So we have a huge delta between what companies can realize as far as a premium and what consumers are demanding and what they can actually provide them. And so what Treum is doing is trying to bridge that gap. So we are building, we have built a platform to help other companies bring trust to their consumers, like Holy Cow, who's a high-end cosmetics company bringing ingredient transparency to their consumers. And by the way, all of these QR codes are scannable. So if you have your iPhones or your Androids, you can start scanning these QR codes and going through some of this, these experiences while I'm chatting. So Holy Cow, luxury goods, high-end cosmetics company, has been a customer since 2019. We've onboarded 2 of their products. They want to onboard 20 more because consumers are reacting and responding positively to this new transparency. Verified Organic is one of our partners where we built an agriculture consortium. One of the products that we're tracing is hemp. So all the way from seed to the activities on the farm to extracting the hemp into CBD to bottling it to selling it. We're live in the US. CBD has been extracted and sold with full traceability. We're tracking thousands of activities and hundreds of lots in tens of maybe hundreds of farms. I'm not sure the exact numbers. So we're talking about full traceability of an ingredient into a product. And finally, one of my personal favorites, because I think it's one of the coolest use cases that have been built on the Treum platform, is memorabilia traceability for the Sacramento Kings. So what we built for the Sacramento Kings was a game live auction platform that uses the module of our tradability module to tokenize game-worn jerseys. So it allows fans to actively engage during the game. If a player is having a really, really great game, or they're there with their son or daughter for the first time and they want to bring back a special piece of memorabilia, they can bid during the game on these jerseys that are being worn in the game. So not something from the rack, the memorabilia rack, or the concession stand. It's something that the player's actually wearing. This has been live since 2020. Unfortunately, we all know that sports right now are on a pause given COVID. But when this was live, we had hundreds of bids and thousands of engaged fans per auction. The average jersey was selling for $1,200, which is way over the typical game-worn jersey auction and sale. And fans were incredibly engaged with the platform. So you can see how we're responding and we're bridging that gap between how do you have full traceability of ingredients? Or transparency of ingredients? How do you have full traceability of ingredients and products? And how do you bring authenticity and ownership to the sports world and the luxury world and the CPG world and expanding into other industries? And what Treum is trying to do is bridge that gap. So I think if we want to recap what we've learned so far, it's consumers have a ton of questions. The erosion of trust has caused them to ask these questions. The globalization of supply chains, the fragmentation of supply chains is making it incredibly difficult for these companies and brands to respond to these questions. And the companies that do respond and provide the customers what they're asking for are realizing incredible success right now. Doubling revenues in the 3-year period is pretty incredible, especially in the luxury goods industry. With that, I wanted to leave about 10 minutes for questions. So I think I'm right about on time. And so the real question is, are you ready to start your trust journey today? So feel free to take a screenshot of this, get in touch. Me or somebody else from the team will be in touch. And let me open this up for questions, Tom, if anybody has any.
Thanks, Tyler. So everyone just put your questions in the chat. We'll use that as a Q&A. And we'll do it live. I'll just kick it off. I'm a huge basketball fan, and I wanted to sort of get your insight on the work that you showed with the Kings there. What is sort of the process? What does that look like? For example, like the Buddy Hield jersey, like when it was essentially, the digital asset was created. Was there a certain person whose job was to grab that like after the game from Buddy and take that and put it in a certain spot? Like how did that flow work?
Really great question. So how do you make the sausage basically? Taking a step back, I should have explained this earlier, but during each of those sections of the supply chain, brands and organizations can kind of pick where they start and move forwards or backwards, depending on what the consumers are asking. So in this case, consumers were demanding authenticity of product and they wanted ownership. So using our tradability module, what we did was we allowed a equipment manager, so somebody in the locker room before the game, to take the jersey, take a picture of it, enter in what number it was, what kind of jersey it was, whose jersey it was, and any other descriptions that were really like made this recognizable and made this searchable. Then once that was done, we had the Kings who managed the auction platform. So that person could define when the auction was going to start, how long it was going to go, and when it was going to end. And then when it was live, fans were bidding on this, outbidding each other. There was a couple fun bidding wars to watch in real time. And after the game, what happened was that same equipment manager would take the jersey, would take more pictures of it. An authenticator would take those pictures and compare them to the pictures that were taken by high resolution images of the player during the game, making sure that those two were the same. issue a certificate of authenticity, and then package it, ship it to the fan that won the jersey. And now that fan has a ownership certificate and has an authentication, I guess an ownership token and authentication certificate that lets them realize the fact that, or let them sell this on the secondary market if they wanted to, share this digitally for more engagement, or just keep it in their house and enjoy it. So it's the users, if you will, were the equipment manager, the auction platform manager, and the fan.
Thanks for that answer, Tyler. A question from Michelle. Thanks for this question, Michelle. This is kind of like a product market fit question. With consumers demanding, provenance, what are they actually ready to pay for? Like, what does, the demand for provenance, how does that translate into like what they're willing to pay for? It feels like a number of provenance platforms are stuck searching for the product market fit with the correct pricing model. So I'd like to get your insight on that.
Yeah, so I think the numbers are pretty clear. There was a report that was put out in January of 2020 by the National Federation of Retail and our friends over at IBM. So they surveyed these 19,000 customers, and so the response is there's about a 30% premium that customers are willing to pay for demand for trust and provenance. So I guess maybe the question is like, what part of it is it a certain ingredient that they're willing to pay for, or is it a certain certification that they're most likely to pay a premium for if that product has that certification? We're seeing trends there. So sustainable packaging is one that customers really respond to. We're seeing an incredible premium for like cage-free eggs. So depending on the product and depending on the scheme, customers are willing to pay different premiums. So it's 37% is the average premium depending on the product. So you do have to do your research, but I don't think I guess I would disagree with the fact that these companies, these track and trace companies and these provenance companies are not finding product market fit. I think it's these companies and brands are trying to figure out what message they should be bringing to the consumer. So I guess this is kind of an oldie but a goodie. We tracked yellowfin tuna from Fiji to New York, and this was at Ethereal 2 years ago. And what happened was we hired a sushi chef, and they made sushi for everyone. And when we served this in a bamboo boat and with a QR code napkin, and a consumer could scan the QR code and see the whole history and provenance of that sushi. The interesting part is that most consumers reacted not like, oh, thank God, I know that this is coming from Fiji. I was so worried because we've all read the different reports about how the sushi that we eat in New York is not actually the sushi that we're ordering. And really the reaction was, okay, that's great. I know that this is tuna, but is this, what about the carbon footprint of this? Or I didn't know that this was coming from Fiji. Or this is, was shipped a day and a half ago. How do I know that it was cold the whole time? And so these questions start emerging from the consumers, stuff that we didn't anticipate. So I think the short answer is you need to get this in the hands of consumers so that you can start getting feedback and be very agile with the messaging that you send back. The issue is if you don't have the information to be agile, then you're setting yourself up for failure. So I think you need the infrastructure in place, which is what we're really targeting, to allow these brands to build their own stories to bring to their own consumers. Hope I answered your question. That was a long one.
Good question. Good answer. From Nikos, this is a good one. How does a secondary market for luxury goods work? Does it go all the way up to the top brands? And can you repeat like how big of a market as that is that? And just to add some color, I'm a big sneakerhead. Secondary market for sneakers, buying and reselling is pretty big. And I've heard that Nike actually encourages that secondary market to drive demand. I wish I knew what Nike was thinking because they're a behemoth. But so the numbers that I gave first, just in the US, the luxury goods industry is about a $250 billion market. The secondary market is about 7% of that. So you get about 24 billion. So the secondary luxury goods market is about 24 billion. Where I think that this is going. So this whole thing is about predicting the future, which I always say that I can't do, but
people ask, so I give the consumers what they want. Is the future is that if I can prove that what I own is actually owned by me, so it's not stolen, and that it's genuine and authentic, and I make that that check very easy. So right now, when you have to verify something that is authentic, you have a variety of different programs. I mean, eBay takes 20% to do this for you. So you can ship your product to eBay and they can authenticate it, which is a person in a room that has some brand knowledge. Or you can send it to other like secondary folks that can do authentication. There's very little automation of this, which makes the actual trade extremely friction filled. So we're imagining a future, and we have partners that do this authentication very well using high resolution image recognition and machine learning, where you can take a picture of a purse, or you can take a picture of a jersey or a sneaker, and that will create a digital fingerprint. Once that digital fingerprint has been uploaded to the blockchain, all somebody has to do is take a similar picture. It runs it through the machine learning algorithm and comes back with a red X or a green check, whether it's been verified, authentic or not. If you can reduce that friction, and you can make it so easy that you can just take a picture of something, authenticate it, you can prove the ownership of it, then you have the two pieces of the puzzle to make trade really frictionless. But one piece is missing, and that piece is the whole chain of custody and the provenance. So even if this shoe is authentic, and even if I know that I own it, maybe this has been in a very damp warehouse for the last 2 years, and it's like full of mold, and it is about ready to crumble. So we allow, in addition to just the ownership and authenticity, we allow customers to enhance the provenance of their asset, of their good. So maybe these sneakers were signed by MJ, and I have a selfie with me and MJ while he's signing them. I would consider that much more valuable sneaker than just a normal sneaker. Or vice versa, if I've used these shoes, or I haven't maintained them, or I lost them for a while and I couldn't prove that they were in my possession, maybe there's some sort of sketchy something that might have went on. So throughout the whole history, I mean, you can start telling the story of your product immutably on the blockchain, so you can't change it. So in 3 years or 5 years or 1 year, you can not only present the ownership and authenticity, but you can also present all the history behind it. And that makes it like a much more dynamic sale. And sneakers, by the way, is very much an open field for this, especially with the ownership and verification.
Well, I think we have time for one more question. There's some great questions in here. We'll definitely follow up with these afterwards. So thank you everyone for asking. This one is from Emma. Hey, Emma. The question is the authenticity of personal protective equipment in new treatments and testing for COVID-19 is huge. I know Treum helped a bit on the PPE that was shipped, but is there a plan to say address a COVID-19 test as it goes through the process of FDA approval?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So we've done work in the past with clinical trials and sample tracking for CRISPR technology. And so we have experience in this industry, in the pharma industry. I think right now the whole world is trying to figure this out. We've done some work tracking. We've tracked tens of thousands of PPE equipment on the Treum blockchain. And it's helped manufacturers realize their inventory, and it's helped customers in hospitals validate that inventory and know when products being shipped. So we've been trying to do our part with this whole PPE global supply chain. The authentication is something that is extremely important. And I don't know whether anyone saw this, but in the past few days, the FDA has removed, I think it was 80 companies in Asia had FDA approval to manufacture this PPE equipment, but the product was so poor that now I think they have, less than 15 have been certified. So a lot of that manufacturing is being brought back to the US. I still think that there's an issue, even if it doesn't matter where in the world you're manufacturing this stuff, you still have to authenticate it and you still have to test it. So providing that full transparency of testing, inspection, certification, and full traceability is the full gamut. So this is a perfect use case that has to use all three of the Treum modules to achieve what the desired outcome, which is the health of this global population. So yes, we're in active talks. If anybody wants to explore more about how we can do this, let us know. And we're at exactly 10:30.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for this presentation. And this was really interesting, Tyler. And just shouting out Ashrith, Masa, Michelle, Iman, Pavel. We will follow up with your questions. We got them, but thank you all for attending this. Any last things you want to get to, Tyler?
Get in touch. Happy to talk. Hopefully we can come back in a few years and see whether I was right or not. Take care.
Have a great Ethereal.
Stay safe.